Jan. Yes, I will lead this discussion. It will be a discussion, democratic, so if you have some questions, raise your hands, and we will get to your question. The next speaker, Birgitta Jónsdóttir, there is a lot to say about her. She is a politician, a parliamentarian from Iceland. She is an activist. She is a former Wikileaks. She's a poet, a writer. Sometimes she calls herself a poetician. There is a lot to say about her, but I think that it's better to give her the floor first. So raise your hands for Birgitta Jónsdóttir.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here and to talk about something that I find to be so important that we have as much possible discussion about and think about as much as possible in our daily lives. And that is democracy and the state of it. Because after I became a lawmaker, I understood that laws are not necessarily really well written. And most parliamentarians don't have enough time to read the laws or understand them because they're written in a language that only lawmakers understand. And I have been an advocate that we have laws that anybody can understand, because how can we abide laws if we don't understand them? And then we have the element of mass surveillance, which is another thing that most people really don't understand what means. I had my own experience with surveillance a long time ago, actually when I was working, volunteering as an activist and organizing a protest camp in Iceland in 2005. And it was Iceland's first international protest camp, so we sent out an SOS and asked the activists from around the world to help us fight huge multinational corporations. Now there are only 320,000 people in Iceland, so obviously it's always the same people protesting, and we're getting a bit burned out already by then. And we were fighting like a massive dam being built in the east of Iceland. And apparently these dirty, dreadlocked hippies that were protesting were a national danger. And so the police went completely overboard and started to surveil everybody, and we had to sort of figure out ways to keep these protesters safe from police harassment. And when we came back from the countryside to the city, there was like undercover police sitting in a car at the end of the street where we were, and everybody was really paranoid about it. And I just decided to walk over to the guy and say, "Hey, why don't you come in for a coffee?" And he said, "Oh, I can't do that." And then I said, "Can I call the media to have you have a photo of you because your boss denies that you exist?" And they were also, listening into our phone conversations. And then we found out later they had a mole from the British police, and became a very known case. His name is Mark Kennedy, and it sort of showed us activists in Europe and people in Europe that police will go at any length to thwart the democratic process of, for example, having organizations fighting for and grassroots movements fighting for healthier democracies. So I've experienced sort of surveillance from many different angles, and then when I became a member of parliament in 2009, I discovered early 2011 that the Department of Justice wanted to get into my personal metadata. Security guy here. But metadata, what the hell is that? I mean, it's really abstract for people, even if you say it's like they want to get access to my private messages and my metadata. It just doesn't mean anything to people. And, you know, I tried to explain it, that this was like a serious breach into, you know, the Icelandic constitution, that the Department of Justice from another country wanted to get my private data, and they want to get private data, and all of you probably know about this story because there was also a Dutch citizen that went through the same ordeal, Rob Honkrijp. I can't say his name correctly, but I tried. So the question that we are actually now all discussing today after the NSA revelations about is it okay for other governments to go into citizens' private data from other countries, obviously nobody thinks that's okay. I mean, even if WikiLeaks was defined by a few nuts in the US as a terrorist organization, putting it into the perspective that what WikiLeaks was doing was acting as the middleman for journalists and as a media, then basically all journalists are terrorists. So the lines are all getting really blurred and weird, and I'm very, very, very thankful that Snowden has actually inspired, and let's not forget who inspired Snowden. Do you know who inspired Snowden? It was Manny. And let us not ever forget Manny, because if he wouldn't have done or she what she did, then we wouldn't be here discussing this. I encourage you to write to her and let her know that we appreciate what she's done. If you feel it is important that we use this information that is being provided to us by Snowden and Manny. So, like with my own case, nobody really felt any need to change laws or try to change things. It isn't until now that people feel an urgency to do something. And I think the first question we have to think about is that can we have a functioning democracy if there is no privacy? Like in Iceland, I managed to get through the best source protection laws through a set of laws that we tasked the government to change in order to make Iceland into a safe haven for freedom of information and expression. And it doesn't really matter if we have the best source protection, because journalists cannot protect their sources. And doctors, they cannot protect the confidentiality between the patients and them. Lawyers cannot protect the confidentiality between their clients and them. It's just the reality that we're facing. So, does it really matter if we have the best possible laws in our countries? If we have the NSA, the Russian security apparatus, or the Chinese, or the Iranians, or any other very organized surveillance apparatus in countries. I mean, in Iceland, we don't even have a secret service, we don't even have a military, yet we're under surveillance. Is it possible to lock this door? Let me try. What can we do? Should we do anything? Should we think about our own privacy? Should we think about how we use Facebook or, you know, Google or this? I mean, this is by far the worst spying tool. And having been like an activist for a long time, it used to be enough to sort of take the batteries out of the phone. It doesn't work like that anymore. You have to, apparently, according to Snowden, put it in a fridge, but not all fridges work, actually. So I did some experimentation. And should we always be thinking about that the Big Brother is listening into what we're doing, or should we think, like many people, and I know that many of you will think, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so it doesn't really matter. Why would they spy on me? And then I will talk to some of you, and then all of a sudden you are in the radar. Even if I haven't done anything criminal, I don't have any criminal cases pending against me. Yet, if somebody calls me, according to the NSA files, you can have a look at it at The Guardian. They made a really interesting interactive portion on their website to explain to us what all of this means. You are then the second tier of surveillance. And then somebody else will call you, and then they are all of a sudden under surveillance. And can we have functioning democracies if this is the case? It doesn't really matter, you know, because we haven't really done anything wrong. How do you feel that actually the government can take all your data, everything you like, and they go into your home? They can go into your home and they can find out, and they do it every day, go into your homes. And they have a look at, like, your bank account, your medical records. They have a look at your love letters, who you're with, for how long. And they don't even leave a footprint in your home after they've gone through all of this. And they can come anytime when you're sleeping, and they can watch for how long you sleep. And they can calculate what you're dreaming of. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? And do you think that we need to change this? Do you think that we can? What are the fundamental principles of democracy? I would have thought that the right to have access to information, the basic human right that is written in most of our constitution, the right for privacy, and the right to express ourselves, the right to speak to whomever we want to speak to without feeling fearful that we might be in some dragnet. It's also interesting, I've had defamation stuff, interesting defamation stuff done about me after I started to volunteer for Wikileaks in 2009 and 10, where somebody had actually gone and searched, like the internet doesn't forget anything, that's another really cute factor. So that person has gone through all my old websites. I've been very visible online since '95, and sort of picked out all the worst things they could think of for American society, like, you know, my father was mentally ill, yes, he must be. Her father was mentally ill, so she must be mentally ill, and stuff like this, you know. So, like, even if you don't think, and I'd completely forgotten that I had written something about mental illness in my family, so we don't necessarily, shouldn't have to think about everything we write, everything we do, or what we like. Because if you like a video, there was another attempt to defame me by looking at videos that I had liked or passed forward. It's not necessarily videos that I agree with, but I like to share it. And so everything we do is now under surveillance, but it's not only the government. You have to think about that. It is not only the governments. The reason why it's gone so far is because it's the corporations that are responsible, because they want to sell our privacy to advertisers. And the reason why I'm not offering you any solutions is because there is no apparent solution, except maybe to pull out all the servers and all these large social media companies from the United States. But if we don't have any international legal framework that protects us, the individuals, from the social media schemes, then it doesn't really matter where it is. Would we feel better if it's in China, behind the Great China Firewall? Would we feel better if it was in Russia, the great defenders of Snowden? I don't know. I think we need to really think hard and start to come up with some really profound solutions. I fear that the ICANN meeting in Brazil is going to be very watered out. It might be a first step, but I don't know. I don't think it's a solution to create a great fortress around Europe. We have enough of that already with migration and so forth. It's very hard to come into all-embracing Europe if you are not from the right race. And then I think we also have to start to take some responsibility ourselves to actually understand that just like we lock the front door to our homes, we have to lock the front door to our communications. And that is why we have to learn how to use encryption. I think it's the very first step. If we want to have a functioning democracy, we have to be a part of making it function. So we can't just wait for governments and some abstract international body of people ruling us come up with the solutions. So first step we can do is to learn to encrypt our stuff. There are now a really beautiful trend happening all over the world, which is called crypto parties. Look out for them because they're very useful. And it's sort of just putting a seatbelt when you go into a car. Very logical, basic stuff. And I think finally we still have a chance to actually change this around, to turn it around. And I would encourage you to have a look, if you want to have a look at sort of really well explained what privacy means in the grander scheme. There was a beautiful resolution done at the International Parliamentary Union. They took my case with Twitter and expanded it into sort of the larger framework of what privacy is and why it's important for our democracies. But you know, democracy will not function if we don't have any privacy. That's just the bottom line. So I hope we'll have healthy discussions about what we can do about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Birgitta. You raised some important questions, hard ones, I think. You said that Edward Snowden, we should be thankful to Edward Snowden. Why exactly?
Snowden managed to do something that many of us that have been aware of this mass surveillance have failed. He managed to wake not only policymakers but the general public in many countries. I know that there's not been a lot of discussion about mass surveillance in Holland and Britain, but it's changing. So it's really up to, you know, good journalists like yourself, I know that you've been writing about these issues, to write about it in such a way that it is relevant to the general public. So it is so much like we can't change anything unless we're aware of things. So I'm thankful for him to actually make it a human interest story, because before it was always just in the attack pages of the newspapers, issues like this.
Well, I'm thankful to him as well, because I noticed that a lot of my stories, they get more readers. But it's still so damn hard to, because when you look at in Holland right now, there is a huge discussion going on about metadata. No, not about metadata, about which politician knew what about metadata. And that's the discussion. It is an important discussion because, well, maybe one of our ministers lied to the parliament, which is important. But the real discussion about what is the purpose of all those intelligence services, how do we balance security and privacy, what is the real threat of terrorism, those discussions are very hard to introduce in the public arena. How do we do that? You have 10 minutes. No.
Well, this is an excellent question, and I don't think I have the perfect answer for it, but I think it's important to make it a human interest story, because if people cannot relate to it, and if it doesn't have any personal reference, then they're not going to care for it. I know that, for example, we sent an Icelandic MP on a fact-finding mission to the German parliament to try to figure out what was going on and what was the discussions there. And for obvious reasons, the Germans are taking it very seriously because it's not that long ago that people could feel what Stasi feels like. And so if we can make it so that people understand that this is way worse than that, and even in countries that we think are very open and that they have healthy democracies. So actually it was very interesting. The Germans had always maintained that they had managed to prevent terrorist attacks by data retention, by using data retention. But then when they were really pushed, it actually turned out that they did it without needing the information brought through via data retention. Data retention means basically that all your metadata is kept with the telecom companies for 6 months and sometimes longer, and then the police or Secret Service can go and sort of filter through all your communications and whom you're with. They don't get access to your personal messages, but they can figure out if you're calling, let's say, the cancer department, and then they can figure out that you might be worried that you have cancer, and so forth. So it's much more, it actually includes much more information than most people are aware of, but it is important that people know that it's not the letter itself, and that's why it's sort of hard to explain. I know that Jacob Applebaum had really good little short stories to put it into context when he was speaking at the CCC just before the new year. So I think if we can make it into stories that make sense in our daily lives, that we can get people to care about it. But while we haven't figured out, and this is a big problem not only with surveillance, it's a big problem in getting people to understand and put how technology works, and, for example, how it's changed journalism and how it's changed accessibility to stories, and how it's sometimes very difficult for journalists to write stories because of all the... I think it's globalization in a really bad way, because you have multinational corporations and their lawyers sort of run around the world to try to take stories out of our historical records, and then people don't really understand that, so you have to refer to book burning. So, and the same with we used to have libraries in our homes, and now we have digital libraries, and it's very accessible to governments, and we might be reading stuff they don't like us to read. I mean, I downloaded the Anarchist cookbook just for fun, because I used to have a hard copy of it when I was a teenager. So I just downloaded it to let them know that I was reading it as a prank. But they didn't know that I had the Anarchist cookbook physically. So, and we forget about all these things. We think it's really good for the environment to have non-paper books in the cloud. But why is it called the cloud? It's not really, somebody said it's not really like a cloud. So we have to create common sense metaphors, and it's hard for tech people to do it, like for geeks. Because, so we have to have more writers help the geeks put it into human interest stories.
We at the Correspondent, we did a story a couple of weeks ago about metadata. We found a volunteer that collected all his metadata for a week from his smartphone. So everything he did on WhatsApp and Safari, etc. And not content, but only the metadata. And we gave the logs of the data to 4 analysts, and they really painted a very intimate picture of his life. It was really astonishing. They knew what was the name of his girlfriend. He knew every day he went to his work at a certain time, and they knew that. They could extract it from all the data points. So that was a success story. but it's still so difficult. We were talking about Germany, and they had the Stasi, and they had the Second World War. But on the other hand, Angela Merkel was re-elected with a landslide a couple of months ago. So after certain revelations about the cooperation between the German intelligence services and the NSA, so the whole story that Germans are so fond of privacy, that it's so important for them, I think that's kind of relative as well, because they didn't vote with their feet when they could have. But that's another question. You were talking about the protection shield in Iceland, the IMI. Could you tell a little bit more about that, about your ideas behind it, and the way it is now, where it's now?
Yeah, I'll be very happy to. It's one of the few things that actually makes me feel it's worthwhile to be in this service inside the Parliament. So in 2009, I was elected into the Parliament in 2009. I helped create a sort of coalition of the grassroots movements party, which was a hit and run, and one of the main things we wanted to do was to work on transparency and democratic reform. And so, by chance, on the 1st of December 2009, I'm invited to speak at an event for the Digital Freedom Society, and at the event there are some dudes from Wikileaks speaking as well. And back then, hardly nobody knew what Wikileaks was. But they were quite known in Iceland because they had leaked this really important document from one of the collapsed banks. And there was an attempt to put a gag order on the news from the state broadcaster. And it was actually a successful gag order that was put on them, and that was the first time we'd ever experienced something like this. It was a complete failure though, because the journalist basically said, just go to Wikileaks, go to this website, wikileaks.org, and we put like a photo of Wikileaks logo if you want to read what we can't tell you. So they were speaking about an idea that they had sort of recycled from John Perry Barlow, who had been at the same conference a year earlier, about what Iceland can do after the crisis. Like, what can Iceland do to re-establish its credibility in the world and to do something meaningful? And the idea was to make a reversed tax haven, like transparency haven. Where we would basically could legalize the concept of Wikileaks. And I thought it was a brilliant idea, so I sort of approached them afterwards. It was Julian and Daniel, they were a duo back then, and said, let's do this. And I had an understanding about it because the importance of these ideas, because I'm a geek. I've lived on the internet for a long time and worked there, but I'm also a writer, and I worked as a journalist, and very not a proper investigative journalist, but I've worked within that field, and I understand how important it is. I actually worked at a tiny, tiny little paper in New Zealand, the local paper for villages. It was very interesting.
In New Zealand?
Yeah, in New Zealand, yeah. And it was called the Russell Report. So it basically what we did, which was really the first time it's ever been done in the world, and I encourage other lawmakers to do this, was that we sort of both through contacts that Wikileaks had and through contacts that we had in Iceland went and tried to find people that could help us cherry pick all the best laws from around the world in order to create the best possible law for freedom of information, expression, and speech. And we had the privilege of having Rob Hongrep. Yeah, beautiful. He happens to be here with us, but he's hiding. And today, and many other great people. To sort of define what are these laws, you know, what laws are important to the 21st century, and we looked at whistleblowing laws, source protection laws, process protection, you know, virtual company laws that they have, where you can actually have, you don't have to be physically there. And then we were thinking about sort of the investigative journalist branches of different news outlets, so they didn't have to move the Guardian to Iceland. They could just have the investigative and sensitive stories hosted in Iceland. And just a myriad of different laws that are relevant, and you can actually find the parliamentary proposal on our website. I'm actually updating the website right now, so it's not really relevant, the newest information. So I'll reveal the newest information about what's going on. So we already, like, a parliamentary proposal is not law. It's basically, and I could have never passed this through the Icelandic parliament if I had written out all the individual laws. So basically I tasked the government to change somewhere between 10 and 13 laws in 4 different ministries in order to make a safe haven. And I had one minister be the super boss to boss the other ministers around, and report to the parliament every 3 months about process. And for some weird reason, everybody in the like, I got people from all parties to be on it. I still don't know how I did that. And then I came from the tiniest party. And then everybody said yes. The entire parliament said yes. I don't know what happened really, but it's very hard to say no to freedom of information, I guess. And then the ministry actually started to work on it. They were very slow. It took them a tremendous amount of time to start to work on the laws. And then I was a bit fearful when the new government came into power in April, but the steering group is meeting on Monday. They created a special steering group during the last government, and they're carrying on with the work. And there are discussions of making a permanent IMI board to maintain the spirit of IMI, which is to always have the best functioning laws in these different categories. And I want them to add now privacy to it, because that was, at the time, nobody would have understood what we were trying to say. Like in 2010, early 2010, if you would talk about privacy issues like have been revealed now, we would have been classified as very severely paranoid. So in the next, they're going to focus on wrapping up the whistleblowing laws and the historical records protection. Protecting the historical records is very important because if you don't have a date to when it's illegal to change news stories, we will see huge gaps in our common knowledge about certain corporations and politicians. So I'm very happy that it's actually carrying on, because you never know with politics. I mean, you can't trust politicians.
So it's still in the process, but when you dream about the ideal outcome, where will it lead us to? For me, for example, I'm an investigative journalist. What can I come to Iceland and be more protected than I am right now? Or Edward Snowden, can he come to Iceland and live under the shield?
Well, this is not intended for whistleblowers in their physical form. This is intended to keep stuff up no matter what. So, like, there have been very many serious attempts to get stuff down or off Wikileaks. And so, like, websites like that or news outlets, like, very often have to go through something which has been determined as like digital refugees, so they have to go from one country to another. So we wanted to provide and do an experiment. We can have one country where you have all the best laws in order to ensure that information is accessible. But it is also important to set new standards for whistleblowers and set new, just raise the bar for 21st century lawmaking. Which means that when we're writing the laws, we take into account at which day and age we're living. I think, like, and this, of course, is very depressing that I can't tell people like Snowden, who is being made stateless by his own country, and I can't help that Tibetan blogger that risks his life to put out the stuff, but I can make sure the stuff remains up. That was the idea. And that you can actually, like, have, and that's why many sort of, and it was originally intended for journalists, because we were very concerned about the status of, like, both the difficulties to tell stories, and also the difficulties in maintaining the stories intact online. So it was originally thought in that way, but then, like, I've had people contact me that work for unions. I've had people contact me that want to find out ways to just protect their users, you know, that are just sharing, you know, common stuff, like emails. So as the surveillance insanity unfolds, I'm hoping that countries will actually just look at the IMI laws, which are, you know, have complete CC. I would really actually like to go in a competition with another country on who is going to be first.
Maybe you have to explain what CC is, I don't know.
Okay, so it's the Creative Commons license. So basically it means that you can share stuff freely as long as you're not profiting from it. And that's another whole thing about, like, I didn't really realize until a few years back how important it is that we reform our copyright laws for privacy, because if you want to enforce the copyright laws, we're also fortifying our privacy, because you can't take out the packages that the copyright companies are wanting the state to do unless you actually have access to everything. So I actually blame the copyright companies for starting the technology and the methods for the mass surveillance. So it is always the perfect marriage between the corporate and the state. And just as I remembered, sorry, I'm just going to include one factor that many people might not be aware of, and that is, okay, so NSA has access to all our stuff, but it's not really public servants that are going through and mining through our stuff. It's private corporations. And you have people like Jeremy Hammond, I encourage you to have a look into his case, that are in prison now for 10 years for exposing the scope of and how low they're willing to go with this personal data to attack organizations like Wikileaks.
Yeah, that's. Are there any questions yet? Ooh, a lot of questions.
Thank you very much for your interview. I'm also very thankful to Edward Snowden, because I think we all have a right to know what's going on. But I'm also very interested in the future, and I think we should talk more about that. And my question is, what are we going to do about all of this? To make it more specific, when we talk about security, we all know that the security service that we have here in Europe, you don't even have one in Iceland. The Dutch is very small comparatively in size, as is the German service. We are dependent on American and British secret services for our security for historical reasons after the Second World War. So what can we do about this? How can we protect ourselves on our own principles, trusting our own principles, and be less dependent on maybe states and their principles that do things differently that we don't agree with? Shall we do two more?
No, first,
no,
first this one, please.
Or I'll forget them. So this is very important question, because I think we can start by putting more demands on social media companies, for example. What I've discovered in my own case was that in the first ruling, the judge basically ruled that I and every one of you, we don't have the right to look after our own banks when it comes to protecting our sort of and knowing about the government probing into our stuff. And I thought that was quite disturbing. And then after the NSA revelations, we found out that the NSA has been paying the social media companies to create backdoors. So how can we trust them? So as long as we do not put any pressure on the media companies that host our data, and I'm in particularly concerned about Google, because they host emails, they have Google Docs, and all these different sort of, and our browser history and so forth. So what are we doing both as governments? I mean, local governments can demand that Google has a branch that does not share information with the US or the UK governments. But I think we need to do this on many different fronts. I mean, there have been attempts, and I know there is an Icelandic startup that is called Mailpile, and they are developing encrypted email services that gives you ownership of your data, but it's also encrypted in an easy way. It's not these sort of like PGP long codes that you don't want to send your grandma, or she thinks that you're sending her a virus. So it's in a really interesting development, but we have to put much more demand on these companies that we're actually working for. Every time you do something on Facebook, you are volunteering work for Facebook, and now they want you to pay for your work. So they want you to pay for your friends to see what you do. It's a weird business model. Maybe we should be willing to pay a little bit for services like mail services and social media services, just like we're willing to pay for Netflix or Spotify. There is nothing free. We are giving them our privacy, these corporations, for the services they render to us. And I think it really starts with us, on an individual level, and also by collectively demand that our governments make sure that we're not so easily accessible, or not financially present, but it's the best I can do.
Other question?
Thank you. Well, I just want to ask something that's in relation to the previous question, and it's something that you said earlier, is that what can we do going into the future? And I think any solution that you have, any sort of pressure that we can put, whether it's on corporations or our government, has to start before that with some sort of social upheaval about all of this, at least more than there is to this point, because all of us here are interested in the subject and will continue to be interested, but there are not enough people in this room to put pressure on our government to not only have a debate in the chamber this Tuesday about whether or not our minister lied indeed, and whether the defense minister should or shouldn't have warned them. Okay, all right, let's get that over with, and have an actual debate in our parliament about the 10th lit of our constitution, which states that we have the right to privacy, which has become non-existent. But there needs to be more of a broader sort of, in Dutch we say, draagvlak. And I would want to ask you actually, because you're of course a journalist and living in the Netherlands, how you think we can create more of a draagvlak,
Leverage?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is to me. Yeah. Okay, interesting. No, I think that you're totally right, and as I said earlier, for us journalists, it's difficult. I wrote tons of articles in which I explained that I've got nothing to hide is not the right argument. I wrote a lot of articles about the dangers of metadata, and well, they are being read, and I get a lot of reactions. But it didn't change the discussion. I mean, and that's something I'm struggling with as well. But maybe we can start a revolution here today with 200 people. Maybe that will work. But if you have suggestions, please, I'm open.
I have one suggestion which is already happening. Like there is a a collective of people that are doing, it's called Indie Web. They're trying to figure out ways to create alternatives to the social media that we are used to using today. The only way for it to work is for us to leave, you know. But before that happens, and I know there are many people working on ways for us to be able to leave, like an exodus, like happened with MySpace, which is awful, and then somebody offered a better service. So MailPal, for example, when that is going to be launched, it was very interesting. It was a startup that actually, they went on Indiegogo, 3 guys that are doing it, and they got twice as much money as they asked for to develop this because there's so much need. So something is happening. Just be willing to use it and encourage others to use it. You know, you don't want to have sex with somebody with AIDS without protecting yourself, right? So use your internet condoms.
A month ago, I had an interview with a professor from the States. His name is Eben Moglen, and he said something very interesting. I think he said that we have to frame the privacy discussion as an ecological, environmental problem. That the choices that I make about my privacy, so the choice that I make to use Gmail or to use Facebook is not only about me, because Gmail isn't reading my mails, they're reading the mails of all the people that mail with me. So it's not my problem, it's the problem of the people around me. And he used a kind of nice metaphor, I think, that when you have those cigarettes with the warnings, that when you say on a cigarette package, you will die when you smoke, it doesn't work, or it works a little bit. But when you said, people around you will die when you smoke, then people start stopping with smoking. So I thought that was a kind of a nice way to look at this issue, at this problem.
There's lots of people here as well.
My question was actually what you said about it's not the problem about privacy. I think is that I can't control my own privacy, and I am very aware of my privacy. I don't use Facebook. Yeah, funny that there's some Twitter hashtag there that we can discuss with you guys. But when I tell my family, don't put Facebook on your telephones because Facebook will make a shadow profile of me and I don't have anything to say about it, the problem is I can't choose for my own privacy anymore. And of course I want to mention that Startpage is a Dutch initiative that doesn't encrypt and encrypts your data and doesn't store any metadata. It's a Dutch initiative, startpage.com. How can I choose for my own privacy when my environment doesn't? What can I do?
Move to Iceland, maybe.
So that's not even going to help because like all these ecosystems that sort of like the clouds, like somebody has a Dropbox, where does the stuff go to? We don't know. So I think, like, and this is what I really like, is that I think you should actually have a whole conference with technological experts that here at this university, because it's obvious that all of you guys have done your homework and you are capable of actually having in-depth discussion about these things. I think that, you know, in your case, you are aware, you're doing all the right things, and you can just carry on doing it, and I think there are so many people that are actually developing stuff right now that will have, so we have choices. Before we didn't really think about these things, so we didn't think, there were very few people that thought about it. And if you said, I don't want to go on Facebook or Spybook, like I call it, you were like, basically, you are not a part of the community anymore. Like in Iceland, if you're not on Facebook, you miss everything, because everything is posted there. Even the pirates in Iceland, the pirate party, they do most of their work on Facebook, and it's like, I'm always asking them not to, because it's so easy. So it's a community problem, like you address. But I think that you need to teach the people around you how you protect yourself, and inspire them to use. I think that's the best way. So you create a new ecosystem.
I just did with Stargate, an alternative to Google.
Yeah.
But why do you think that you make those decisions, but your environment doesn't? What's the difference between you and your environment?
I didn't want to say his name, but I missed it thanks to George Orwell, of course. I think if everybody read 1984, and the discussion is always, okay, you read 1984 and you're way too paranoid, and I just like said, like Stasi, we're way past 1984, we're already, and I think I'm aware because I did computer science and I'm now in social science, so I'm combining those issues, and I'm experiencing the social outcast stuff and the internet bubble. Like Google wants me to know what I want to know, and yes. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist to be told what I want to know. I want to think for myself, and every time I experience that I'm put into corners with Facebook, of course, I feel sometimes like a social outcast with some of my friends who say, yeah, you know, we had it on Facebook and you didn't know of it, that's your problem. No, I don't want to be forced by my environment to do stuff I don't want to do. And it's like, say, the examples, why do you lock your doors? Because I don't want to enter your house if you don't want me to. And it's like the awareness that I'm putting to change in stuff that I didn't choose of, and that's a very fundamental issue for me. I don't want somebody to do that.
Is he the only person in the room with that emotions? Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, but what's the question?
Well, if there are more people in the room who took the measures that he took.
What measure?
Show of hands, perhaps?
Sorry?
Other people who feel this way? Can we show of hands?
Yeah, of course I do. Do act this way, not feel, but act.
Act. How many of you have put on the internet content?
Are there people that use encryption? Yeah.
Alright. Talk to this guy if you want some help.
We will organize a crypto party, I think.
Yes, exactly. So. You organize a crypto party. Google it. I think Rob would have. No, start it. Sorry.
Duck, go it.
Yeah. Start up it.
A crypto party is an evening or just an event in a room where hackers and normal computer and internet users get together, and the normal internet users they learn how to use the basics of encryption. And that's the short version. More questions? Yeah.
So, thank you very much. I think we all agree on the importance of bringing this to attention, giving it more, bringing it into the public knowledge, creating more consciousness. But I hate to say this, but we have to also consider the positives of surveillance. Just take a moment and consider the technological advances that have brought us to this point that this is possible. And imagine the power that this technology gives us to predict human behavior. I realize that there's a very big there's a big discussion going on, and it's important to protect our privacy. But I have to play the devil's advocate, mention that there's also something very positive that can be taken out of this technology, and it's inevitable that it's going to happen. Imagine, you mentioned that one person's life was pretty much dissected within a week using metadata. But in reality, it's not one person, not 10, it's millions upon billions. And imagine how that body of information, how interesting that body of information can be, of all these people around the world, their activities, their patterns, and what you can predict through that. I think that's a very, very powerful tool, and this information, this body of information, can actually transcend itself, and it's something that we cannot project, but it's also very, very exciting. So I think that point also kind of has to be considered in the back of your mind.
Exciting in what respect? Exciting scientifically interesting, or?
Not only scientifically interesting, but also in the practical sense. Scientifically, it's very interesting. It's absolutely interesting. But in the practical sense, in being able to predict human behavior on a mass scale, I think that there is huge potential. If you
Yeah, but what kind of potential? Give some examples, please.
For example, what if I'm able to better predict how the markets are going to perform in the future? That's interesting.
So you would want to give away our privacy for the markets? I'll tell you how they use it in the States. I'll tell you something, which is very interesting, how they've used this. I know a lot of people from the Occupy Wall Street, and I just met them recently in Germany at a conference, and I was talking to one of them, and like after the revelations, they realized that the police had used this potential you're talking about to predict exactly and know exactly how many people would be there, so they would have exactly enough police to take down all the protest camps and so forth. So I don't trust governments to have this potential in their hands. More do I trust the market. So I would really like to hear, how this can be used in a positive way. And I don't want to diminish, your excitement about it. But I feel myself, if you could come with an example, how it can actually improve our lives, that you can predict human behavior in advance.
Very briefly, because we're running out of time.
See, my point was simply that you should consider this. It is not all evil. There is potential to be gained, and I think if you delve into it, you'll find that it is there. Using examples of markets, that was just simply one example. But it is a very obvious thing to me that if you're better able to predict human behavior on a large mass scale, that is something that has never been done before in human history. And secondly, it is inevitable that your information is being gathered. We're living in a technological society. It's you can get yourself off the grid, but I don't think that is what you want. Obviously, I'm a huge advocate of privacy. Well, you laugh.
Yeah, sorry.
Actually, I wrote my thesis about Google Street View and right privacy. It doesn't matter. Like I said, I'm playing the role of the devil's advocate, but it's...
Yeah, but it's difficult if you don't illustrate your point with some real examples, because you only say that there are positive sides, but please, come on, give us an example.
I cannot give you an example, but that was not my intention. My simple point was that you cannot stop this technological advance, and that having this huge body of information can be a very valuable thing. And as an investigative journalist, I would like for you to perhaps investigate this side as well. So, I mean, if you're trying to go towards the truth, so it's very easy to just say it's all bad. Maybe there's another side to it as well, and we should explore that. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
We've got 5 minutes now. So one last question?
Yes, please.
All right. I think this lady over here is more important. Sorry.
Thank you. I think I have a question that maybe has to do with what you just said. Because I think there's, people want to feel in control in this time where there is like a lot of insecurity and things going on. And I think there's this interesting paradox between people, maybe they feel in control when they have their own Facebook page and they can put whatever they like on it, and they don't really realize what surveillance is actually on it, because they feel like they actually are in control. So on one hand, people want to show themselves on the internet, and they put their pictures on there, and they tell every single thing they do in a day. They want to share it with the world. And on the other hand, they are afraid of all the surveillance and all these things going on, and they don't want to be controlled. But on the other hand, they give control over them by doing it themselves. So I think that's an interesting paradox. And also, according to his point, when do we feel safe, and what do governments need to do to make us feel safe? Like, we don't feel safe when there's too much surveillance. On the other hand, when there's too many youth on the street that are troublemakers, we want the government to do something. And then there's a lot of people that say, we need more police, and we need things to feel safe. So actually, on the one hand, we need more surveillance to feel safe, and on the other hand, we don't want to be disturbed, so we want our own privacy and know when to look behind the curtains. And on the other hand, we are putting our information on the internet voluntarily. So I think that's an interesting thing. And how do you explain that paradox?
Final remarks?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, so, I don't know. Why human behavior is so contradictory. But I think, we have an interesting thing happening in Iceland that really brought things into focus for me. So, the former interior minister, he got this idea that maybe it would be a good idea to protect the children from violent pornography, to create an anti-pornography shield around Iceland. And I tried to explain to him and his ministry that this was impossible. Even Saudi Arabia can't enforce their shield. And plus, what we need to do, and this is why a crypto part is a really good idea, we organized that on a regular basis in Iceland, and we wanted to organize a crypto party for parents to explain to them how to set up their own filters and how to talk to the kids and explain how to use the internet without having a sort of pornography pushed into their face. And the best thing, I have a 13-year-old who lives online, and the best thing I could do for him was to tell him to put up ad block, so that he doesn't see the ads when he torrents, because all kids torrent. So, but most people aren't aware of it. So we need to empower parents to actually know what to do with incredible data consumption. And so one of the best ways to do it is to have a computer of the kid in the main room, so that you are there and you can have a peek at the screen occasionally. But the state is not going to solve pornography problems because they can't even decide what is violent pornography and what is erotica and what is what. And plus, I don't want to be like, as a lawmaker, I don't want to tell you what you do in your own fucking spare time. It's not my role. I don't enjoy porn myself, but I don't care if others enjoy it. If there is violence, then it's illegal, like with any other violence. It doesn't matter if it's sexual or not. If you hurt somebody, then that's illegal, and it's for police to deal with it. But you can't prevent that sort of stuff by creating a super nanny state and I was really concerned that I'm going to slow down the internet really badly if they would put the filter on them. Then I feel very bad because I like the internet to be fast.
Okay. Unfortunately, this discussion isn't over, but I think we have to stop. I want to thank you, Birgitta, for this talk and this interview. I hope that after after today a lot of crypto parties are being organized, and well, maybe some people think that mass surveillance actually is a good thing. Thank you, Birgitta, and have a nice